Good morning, and thank you so much for the introduction. Thank you so much for the invitation to come. Sven, Natalie helped everything come together. That, together with the wonderful State Department of the United States of America getting me my passport an hour before my flight left yesterday, has really got me in a good place. First of all, I want to apologize because my French is not so good. Mon français est très mal, but I will try. I was an opera singer before coming back into business school, so traveled around and actually did a lot of my performing in French. So if anyone talks to me in French and I answer you like an opera singer, that's why. All right. So let's get off to it. So first, I just want to watch a quick, 5-minute clip of this that just shows the process of home building. I'm totally kidding. I would never do that to you. Insult your intelligence. But where have we come from? You know, where were we? Where are we? 2019 was humming along globally. Not a great year for the lumber market. Not a particularly great year for U.S. housing. And then 2020, we had like the WTF of the millennium. And for anyone interested in why China, Vietnam, those countries had growth that year, the answers are fun, and I will not say them up here, but find me later if you would like to know. So growth in 2021 was quite good, a little bit under these projections, but you know, the biggest underlying theme for me over the past however many years is the issue with supply chains. That is the issue. It affects what all of you do. It affects the entire economy, the real economy, the financial market economy. So, but one thing I don't hear mentioned often is kind of this idea of why, you know, a more kind of intuitive reason why the pandemic kind of roiled supply chains in such an extensive and quasi-permanent fashion. And that has a lot to do with this. These are lockdown indexes that the data was provided to me from Goldman Sachs. And the issue is if this bump was in the same part as this bump, and these bumps matched with these, I don't think the supply chain would be so bad. The financial crisis was awful in 2008, but it was an event that happened to everyone at the same time. This was in great contrast with what we have seen naturally, you know, a natural phenomenon with a pandemic. It affected certain countries first, and then there is this rolling cascading effect where once one country got healthier, lifted government mandates, and could produce and export, well, the countries that they were exporting to couldn't do anything with the imports. And so we had this period where people were having to, on the fly, change their infrastructure of supply chains. And that is the case internationally. It is also the case wholly within the United States, as you know, different states had different levels of lockdown, et cetera. So just important to keep in mind, people ask me when I see the supply chain issues like working themselves out, They don't just work themselves out, but this is one of the reasons that I think getting back to some sort of equilibrium may well take till 2024. So this is from a presentation I did a few months ago, Ukraine war and increasing inflation risk. That was already going on. We've kind of seen that materialize both in the United States and in the United Kingdom. And supply chains, like I said, are a mess. If anyone has seen the movie The Campaign, Will Ferrell and Zach Galifianakis, he says, "Bring your brooms because it's a mess." And that's pretty much where we were, where we are, and hopefully it gets cleaned up as we move forward. We'll go over this in some detail as we progress, but the big concerns are inflation, obviously, the response by central banks with regards to monetary policy. We do currently now have a recession in our forecast, mild recession for 2023 in the United States. And we had this dramatic recession, right? Down 30% in a quarter. The bump up, and the recession was actually just a couple, 2 or 3 overlapping months. But we had this commensurate, increase in economic activity, and that continued. A lot of that in the U.S. had to do, obviously, with the extraordinary amount of fiscal stimulus that was put in. But why do we see recession kind of on the horizon? Well, there are a lot of financial indicators. Daryl may very well go over in his. But with regard to policy, whenever you have a stimulative fiscal policy that's front-loaded, as in all the benefits are going at the beginning and not targeted toward long-term, you're going to have a high bump, but you're also necessarily going to have a drag on GDP growth. And so again, this is Goldman Sachs. This is from 2021, and so what really is important per country with regard to this, is where how high GDP growth is when these effects come in, and whether that GDP growth can offset this negative long-term effect in what we call the out years, which we've seen the U.S. amount of publicly held debt skyrocket lately. I think we're at $5 trillion and counting in pandemic recovery aid of certain types. So the amount of debt that's held by the Federal Reserve, international sovereign states, et cetera, is roughly the size of the economy, and economists in the U.S. are pretty much in unanimity saying that this is unsustainable, which it has proven to be for us. Interesting thing happened during the recession. Savings increased during a recession, which to my knowledge is the first time that has ever happened. I highlight these two bumps just because that is when U.S. households got direct payments from the government. That line is disposable income, and so you see the bump, but they weren't, the red is showing what they spent. And so spending went down, they had more, and then spending did not come back up meaningfully. So it did increase savings and went to the financial well-being of household balance sheets. And you can kind of see that here. With any talk about a housing bubble, that we were in, and similarities to where we are now with just extraordinary home price growth, both in the United States and Canada. And Canada's, I believe, is outpacing income by a good deal more than it even is in the United States. But mortgage debt relative to income is much, much lower this go around. And even consumer debt, that blue line is mostly credit card debt, but some other is in fairly good shape. What about the employment market? Everyone is facing huge labor shortages, and that isn't a surprise given that there are 11 million open jobs currently in the U.S. economy. We are down around 4% in the unemployment rate, but we have that ticking up over the next couple years as the recession takes hold, and in the aftermath, coming back up to 6-7%. So the demand side factors that are mostly at play in the U.S. with regards to the housing market, inflation's obviously playing a role in everything. It's playing a role in home buyers' purchasing power, and this is inflation. This is the inflation measure that the United States Federal Reserve looks at as they decide whether to loosen or tighten monetary policy, and that measure was 4.6% in 2021. That does not include inflation of energy, goods, or food. So that would be much higher. But we have a forecast of about 2.6% average going out through 2024, which is still above the Fed's mandate. This shows the difference in the Canadian inflation rate, excluding energy and food, to the same measure for the United States. I hate when people put PowerPoint slides up that no one can read, so I apologize. But the red is U.S., blue is Canada. So with regard to this measure, the U.S. saw a little bit of a decline in core inflation year over year. Canada, meanwhile, remains on this high upward trajectory, which, as I understand it, is causing a growing amount of friction between monetary policymakers and financial analysts, et cetera, and legislators. Housing inflation in the two countries has been relatively similar. This is not, again, just a measure of home prices, which people know have been 15 to 20% year over year pretty consistently lately. But in this one, the red line is Canada, and you can see that the Canadian rate of housing inflation was under the rate of the U.S. For quite some time. Then they converged, and now Canada has taken the dubious lead. So we've had tightening monetary policy in the U.S. This obviously does not include the most recent increases, which we'll show in a little bit, but it's more so just showing kind of what was already happening to Treasury yields in predating the pandemic. Mortgage rates trending higher. They're obviously trending higher now after the Federal Reserve increased its benchmark rate, the Fed funds target rate. But you can see going back to 2020, beginning of 2021, we already had pressures that were pushing mortgage rates up in the United States. A lot of those had to do with inflation. With inflation does come an increase in interest rates for banks and bank lending, including mortgage lending, as in order to make a loan swap with a customer profitable, they've got to beat inflation for their business too. Canadian and US monetary policy has been pretty much in lockstep. For a while, the US interest rate was above that of the Bank of Canada until late 2019. In 2020, both fell to 1/4 percentage point and have since both increased up to a percentage point. We expect the next 2 Federal Reserve meetings to include 50 basis point increases each. And those are 2 rates of 6 that we expect for the remainder of the year. What's that doing to housing affordability? Obviously, housing affordability is going down. And our housing affordability index, this HOI, it's the lowest it has been since we've been keeping track of the series. And the newest results will come out very soon, but they will have deteriorated closer to the 50. Above 50 means home ownership is affordable to more people at the entry level than less. Under 50 is the converse. Going into the pandemic, we already had in the United States really favorable demographic tailwinds. We had household formation that was picking up that we hadn't seen. Renter share was being lost to homeowner share, owner-occupied. And now we've got Generation X as the largest cohort of new home purchasers. But millennials are coming into that group. And, you know, in contrast to what a lot of people were saying prior to the pandemic, millennials in the US actually do want to purchase homes. It was assumed in large part that there was a major structural change that was going to happen with millennials. Well, like every single other generation, millennials kind of also change as they get older. So not a big surprise, but these tailwinds were the very reason that when everything was shut down in the United States for builders, no traffic coming through homes, no production in manufacturing writ large for the most part. This is the reason that we knew that once those restrictions got lifted, that housing demand was going to just come back, and it wasn't going to come back to a pre-level trend. It was going to come back very robustly. And we toyed with kind of putting it out there. We did not, but that was our internal thought. And sure enough, that's what happened. But it's very intuitive. Unfortunately, some of the players in the industry didn't see that coming. What are the supply side factors that are affecting our members' businesses? Number one is the cost of building materials. This is the National Association of Home Builders' number one priority in all of its advocacy efforts. In my role in the economics department, it's where I now spend the majority of my work. You can see goods prices are up roughly 20% for inputs to residential construction. They're up 26% since January of 2021. They're up 35% since pre-pandemic levels. For context, as far as sectors go and industry goes, these numbers comparing pre-pandemic to where we are right now, these are the greatest. This is the highest rate of inflation among major industries. But it has not just been building materials, it's been the services that go into it as well. Very similar story, except even higher with respect to January 2020, 45% higher for services that are used. Steel mill products, so first was lumber. It still is, but For a pretty long period, you know, I emailed I still remember emailing my boss and our CEO and just saying, you know, steel is on a crazy trajectory, looking forward structurally, anecdotally, why capacity was being taken up. There wasn't a reason to see a slowdown. Well, in 2021, steel mill products prices doubled in price. And that fortunately fell. It rose a little bit this past month. That's kind of a delayed reaction to the Ukrainian, the conflict in the Ukraine, also as part of what happened in nickel markets in London earlier. This is a smooth line of steel futures. This is hot rolled. But then plotting kind of against it, the prices paid for semi-finished steel goods, which are the inputs to the inputs of what goes into a home. We have a pretty good idea looking historically. This has been the case going back quite far, that the time between kind of these spot futures prices and movement in this particular category is 2 or 3 months, which is something that's really useful to be able to tell our members, because we can get a leading indicator of this, and then it takes about 3 to 4 to 5 months for that red line to peak at the finished good level with regards to steel. Gypsum products have also been problematic. Drywall, huge component of construction in the US, less so in Canada, I believe. 5.5% average for quite a while. Last year it was 23% higher. Ready-mix concrete, I had often kind of told people, you know, this is my like bellwether for inflation. This, as far as construction commodities go that are used in all types of construction, this sucker moves 2% a year on average, like clockwork. The exceptions being the back in 2005, 2006, and now. So they're up 9%. It's no coincidence that I think inflation is up about 9%. And interest rate changes as of late, as with most commodities, are probably going to damage this market further. So I don't have to educate on lumber prices to this group. You know, the random lengths in US dollars reached 1514 or 1515 back in May 2021. It's come down significantly since then, and from all accounts, it looks to be not in free fall, but decreasing at a rate that seems to be sustainable in the short term. So we're looking to see how low that may go. For our members, it takes, especially when prices come down, it takes at least a month and a half or 2 months for our builders to actually see any impact on the price of their lumber packages. So anyone who has read what builders are saying in the paper, A, I don't have control over what our members say, but B, it's just because they don't get that benefit for quite a while. Domestic sawmill output in the U.S. increased. It fell dramatically after the housing bust, financial crisis. It really took a heavy toll on the industry, but they've had trouble lately, kind of ramping up. You can see they've had trouble getting employment back to theirs. But if anyone knows the that's the Transformers theme song in French, just for everyone. Possibly the single biggest shortage we have right now are single-phase transformers. The reason that is probably, in my opinion, the most worrisome material shortage is that if you can't get a transformer before you start developing land, you can't develop that land. You can't get power to that area, much less once you have homes built, you have to have declining transformers in there. And this has been an issue for 4 months and keeps expanding in geographic scope. A single problem plaguing businesses of every size, every industry, not necessarily these first two, but definitely this dearth of labor. Where the hell is the labor? Well, labor force participation rate is down in the United States after stabilizing for about 4 years, starting in early 2016, and construction jobs keep surging. The openings keep surging. We have 400,000 unfilled vacant construction jobs in the US, while their wages are trending higher, almost as high as inflation. I will just note that this is different than incomes, because incomes are coming nowhere near this level. And then regulatory costs in the US make up about 1/4 of the price of a new home, split between development and construction. The outlook with regards to builder confidence is not good. It just took a heavy decline in the past reading, which I don't think actually was put here. Single family starts, we have 13% in two straight years, increasing, and then 0 and coming down 6%, and then back to 0. So we see the housing market as slowing, and that's no surprise. It's nothing out of this world, because it started slowing months ago. Multifamily construction, however, is growing. So for those of you who deal a lot to multifamily firms, which are typically much larger, this is good news. The 2-year increase is 40%. It's a volatile category, but this seems to be around to stay, stabilizing at one point at about 500,000. Remodeling, likewise, will continue to go up, experience very healthy growth as a result of two things. People want more space, and so they're remodeling for home office reasons, and that, but they also have no choice because there's no homes that are available to move into. So, or it's so tight that they're too expensive. You want your kids to stay in their same school district in the United States, not have to make a big move, change friends. People are adding space to their houses. So I'm going to leave these because I've basically already gone over them, and I believe Sven and my actual timer are up. But I'd be remiss not to mention, yeah, I should put that back up. This looks like Olympic hockey. US v. Canada, softwood lumber tariffs. This has been a top issue for NAHB, 5 disputes. I don't have to go over the history of this. Same arguments each time, US claiming Canada subsidizes its industry. Then we levy tariffs on goods coming from Canada. Canada files complaints. And eventually, every single time, and I'm convinced it'll be this way this time, the US acquiesces and we come to some sort of agreement. The main reason that this has not happened as of yet has been that the NAFTA panels are the ones that the US listens to. We don't tend to listen to international law trade bodies like the WTO. Apparently, we think we're better than that. I don't, but we do. But with trade, Biden is focusing on trade in Asia Pacific to great extent, sending his people all across those countries. It makes no sense to me why we're not more focused on resolving the dispute with Canada. Our advocacy efforts on this front run from government affairs. We have to educate and re-educate congressional staffs and senators, representatives, to an industry that is very hard to understand when you're first starting out. And they have the attention spans of like a fly. So you have to do it in a few sentences. We've built coalitions among senators, Democrats, other housing associations, and we have had many calls with the White House. Economics, we do a lot of lumber webinars and building materials kind of writ large, and we do a lot of research on the impact to prices from each $1,000 increase in prices out 150,000 Americans from owning a home. Do the same thing with interest rates. I don't even want to tell you what the number is for interest rates. We do tons of member surveys. Our legal team is active with attorneys general of different states in the U.S., and social media is a big part of that campaign as well. So with that, I apologize I went over, but I'll take any questions with the time that I do have remaining.
Thank you very much, David, for the presentation. We already have a question on the platform, so feel free to post your questions and comments, or we have the flying mic in the room also. Yeah, you're good.
31 minutes.
You're good.
Right,
you're good.
1 minute. That's good.
So the question is in French, David. Will you answer by singing? I might try this for the second one.
Sure.
Be prepared. Okay, now it's in English.
I was serious.
All right. You showed, it's from Steve White. You showed a chart of housing inflation and said that this wasn't house prices. What is housing inflation in this chart? Cost of building.
So part of that, I assume, is kind of the explanation of housing prices, house inflation not being reflective of house prices in general. That's just because of the way that both Canada's reflect home price movements more broadly than the United States. The US uses in its calculation for inflation what are called imputed rents, the rent of all homeowners, if they were to rent out their house, how much that would be and what those have done. So we generally use shelter. The Canadians, as far as I can tell from Statistics Canada, there are people here that'll know way better than I do, use home prices as an explicit input to that calculation. So that's why that chart on inflation showed kind of the combined effects for utilities, rent, and indirectly home prices.
All right. Hope it answers. Thank you. There's no other question on the platform. Do we have questions in the room? Il faut l'essayer, le micro qui vole. Alors, est-ce que quelqu'un veut... Sven est prêt, il s'est pratiqué, là. No questions.
No other, I think I have one.
Sure,
yeah.
Go ahead.
David, I would like to hear you talk a bit more about the softwood lumber dispute. Give us a bit of your feeling. Do you feel more listening from the new administration? Can you give us your own forecast a bit?
Yeah, we met with Minister Ng and the current ambassador and the prior ambassador, but our meeting with Minister Ng was a couple months ago. She seemed cautiously optimistic. Our U.S. trade representative threw a whole lot of cold water on that recently, as did the U.S. Commerce Secretary who oversees the International Trade Commission. That was disheartening, but one of the potential reasons that we may see an agreement on the horizon is that inflation numbers are so high, and tariffs are by nature inflationary. And also, we have sorry, the NAFTA panel that I was mentioning before, that adjudicates these cases, that is finally getting formed in the next month. So what usually happens is we'll bring our rates down after that decision, and then there'll probably be about 3 more decisions. But once that process gets started, historically speaking, it usually just takes about a year before we come to an agreement. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the effect that a potential recession has also, and the price of the commodity. In the old agreement, we had a hot markets provision, so things didn't apply when prices were above a certain level. So for the past couple of years, on average, there's not been a great incentive to come to the table by both private and public players in both countries. As those prices come back, and we'll see how long they stay, and potentially coincide with a recession, that puts a lot of political pressure on the issue, to the point that usually in election years, which this year in the United States is a midterm election, usually people say we can't get anything done during it. Well, it's not a presidential election, and so that doesn't really apply here, because President Biden and his people can make this happen if they make the right calls to Canada's representatives, and just hammer it out with Trudeau.
A year and a half maximum. We'll check you in a year and a half.
I would say in the next 18 months, I'd put it at a probability of like 75%.
All right, thank you. We have another question. It's coming from Rick Doman. U.S. demographics for housing look encouraging. Where do you see housing starts over next few years and impacts of higher interest rates?
Housing starts over the next few years basically flat, and they'll be up a little bit this year, but the effect of interest rates really will start to kick in as far as starts are concerned. The way our mortgage rates regulations work kind of makes this have a delayed effect. So those mortgage rate effects won't kind of take hold probably for another 3 or 4 months, after which we'll see a big decline purely because of interest rates. And so at that point, it'll be very, very worrisome, especially if in the United States, the housing sector tends to lead the rest of the real economy in terms of economic growth or contraction. So, hopefully we are not seeing a contraction in housing production.
All right, thank you. There's no more questions. All right, so I have another question for you.
Okay.
Yeah. C'est votre premier séjour à Montréal.
Ouais.
Vous avez étudié comme ténor plusieurs années avant d'étudier les affaires. Alors, comment vous sentez-vous dans ce premier séjour à Montréal?
Alors, vous voulez je chante ici?
That's what you said you would do if I were to ask a question in French. Oh, yeah. We'll just turn it off.
That's okay, I won't pick it up.
Okay. Wow! Wow! Merci beaucoup, David Logan. This is fantastic. Thank you so much.